Captain Charlie Thomas with the Bristol, Tennessee Police Department is with us, and he is next. And then after him, Margie Quinn with the Assistant Special Agent in charge at TBI is going to be our final presenter for today.
Good morning. My name is Charlie Thomas. I'm with the Bristol, Tennessee Police Department. Started back in '92. The Sheriff Mathis and I guess started about the same time in law enforcement. In 2001, our department applied for and received a grant through the state to fund a domestic violence officer position, and I was fortunate enough to be the person selected to do that. So for 3 years, domestic violence was basically my job. And since that point in time, our department has become a training center for law enforcement for domestic violence. There's 4 funded across the state. Ours covers the 11 counties of Upper East Tennessee. We do 2 basic and 2 advanced classes a year, sometimes more if we have the money. But I think those classes are making a big impact on the way law enforcement officers look at domestic violence, because officers come from the general population. They have the same culture as everybody else, and they look at things the same way as everybody else does. And sometimes getting them to change their mindset goes a long way towards helping solve this problem. But anyway, I'm going to try. I agree with Sheriff Mathis. There's absolutely no way that I can give you accurate to the dollar figures as to how much we spend a year on answering domestic violence calls, but I'm going to try to give you at least a general idea of what it costs us to do that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. These are our numbers. We've actually been tracking these pretty regularly since 2001. Our arrest rate on domestic violence incidents runs somewhere around 75%. So when you see that top line that says domestic abuse, that's the number of actual calls that we've answered. And you can figure in about 75% of those cases somebody went to jail. The rape figures, I wish we had a 75% arrest rate on our rape cases. We don't. It's generally a lot lower than that, somewhere around 20%, and there's a lot of varied reasons there. And a lot of it has to do with victims being unwilling to put themselves through a second victimization in the court system. And then, of course, our sexual assaults. Our murder average is less than 1. I don't know how you kill 75% of a person, but that's what our average is. But the one homicide that we've had this year, I'm going to talk a little bit more about and try to give you an idea of what that was domestic violence related. Most of our homicides that occur in Bristol, and we don't have a lot, probably 60 to 70% of those are somehow related to domestic violence. And then we track what we call domestic verbals, because this is something I saw back in 2001 when we started this, is we would have 2 people arguing to the point that somebody in the household calls the police. There's not been any physical violence, because a lot of these relationships start out without physical violence. It's all emotional and psychological abuse. So we started tracking those, and as you can see, when you add those 2 figures together, we're answering about 800 calls a year that have something to do with domestic violence, and our average number of reportable calls, we answer something like 35,000 calls a year, but our reportable calls are less than 10,000. So that's a very big percentage of the calls that we're going on that are in some shape, form, or fashion related to domestic violence. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Um, I'm not a accountant, but I tried to do my best to come up with an average of what it costs us to answer one of these calls. And so if you figure, everybody knows domestic violence calls are pretty dangerous for law enforcement. So we don't send just one officer. When we get one of these calls, there's usually at least two. And most of the time we try to have two officers and a supervisor. So a lot of times you have three people tied up there. We have our own unique paperwork that we developed to kind of track these things. It's not something that can be filled out in just a minute or two. We have a protocol as to how our officers answer these cases. So 4.5 man hours a call is probably a little low if you start figuring in court, because a lot of times there'll be multiple court settings. One of the things we do have that, as General Stolz pointed out, we have that Wednesday Domestic Violence Day. The judge likes to set these, if we arrest somebody on Thursday, he likes to set the case for the next Wednesday. Well, a lot of times it's hard for the officer to get people subpoenaed and make arrangements and get them there. So a lot of times these cases get reset, and they'll spend more than 4.5 hours in that adds to that 4.5 hours. But if you figure 4.5 man hours per call, you're talking $190,000 that we've spent over the last 3 years, basically, just on the 300 and some odd cases a year where we're making reports and there's been a actual crime committed. If you look at the domestic verbals, those don't take as much time. There's not as much paperwork to do, but that's still roughly $120,000 that we've spent, and that's only manpower. That's not counting all the other costs associated with supplies and fuel and wear and tear on vehicles and all that stuff that goes into answering those calls. If you go to the next slide. Rape, sexual assault, and murder, it's almost impossible to put a dollar figure on what it costs to investigate those cases. We had one that was, the murder that we had occurred on May the 31st. It's kind of fresh in my mind, and it was easy for me to go back and pull some figures and try to come up with an idea on it. So I'm going to try to give you an idea of what we spent on that investigation. But when you start talking about investigating rapes and sexual assaults, you have all this specialized training that people have to go through. Learn how to talk to victims to get the evidence that you need to prosecute the case in court. So, you got not just the manpower, but the training that goes into it, specialized equipment. We've got an alternate light source that we use if you have a victim that's been beaten or been choked, you can use that alternate light source sometimes and bring out that deep bruising that you can't see with your naked eye. That one piece of equipment was $15,000. On May 31st, we had a call that was reported as a guy called in and said, my wife's blown her brains out. So we go to the scene. She'd shot herself, supposedly, she had shot herself in the side of the head with a rifle. She was left-handed. The entrance wound was on the right-hand side, and her left arm was almost 100% disabled. So immediately a little red flag started going up. So we had on the scene, the call came in about 10 o'clock. So from about 10:30 that night until 6 a.m., that's how many people we had just on the scene. And that doesn't include General Stolz. His office is really good about working with us. When we have a case like this, it's that important. They'll send the DA up just to make sure we don't do something we shouldn't, or don't forget to do something we should. So we had one of his assistant DAs with us almost that entire time too. And that's not counting the fire department personnel that were there and everything else. So that happened on Friday night, or actually Thursday night, then Friday morning. The weekend, we had people down there on overtime. The entire next week, we spent, he got to the jail and he made some incriminating comments to some of the jailers, and we heard that he had made phone calls, and so I've got 5 investigators assigned to general investigations. I've got 3 assigned to drugs, and almost my entire division spent the next week doing nothing but running down leads on this case and working on it. In addition to that, we had the Sullivan County Sheriff's Department send some people up to help us do a 3D mapping of the crime scene. This occurred in a high-rise apartment complex, and we interviewed probably half of the people that live and work there. So we've spent, rough estimate, somewhere around 500 man-hours on this case, and between $15,000 and $20,000 just on one investigation. And we've still got a long way to go. There's still I've still got a lot of little things to mark off General Stopps's to-do list before we get to the point of prosecuting this case. So, and that's, like I say, that's just one case. It's a lot of money. And I think that's my final slide. So, we have those figures represent the $20,000. My overtime budget is $80,000 a year. A lot of that money was spent as regular time, but a good portion of it was spent as overtime. So it has a big impact on what I can do. If we have another one of these cases, it may limit the number of people that I can have out working it. It may take us longer to accomplish the things that we accomplished within a week. Now it may take us 2 or 3 weeks the next time, because I don't have the money to spend on overtime, and officers have to do it during their normal work day. And the problem with that is the longer you go from the event till you interview witnesses, sometimes you don't get as quality a statement. They don't remember stuff, or they become reluctant to. Everybody wants to talk about it right after it happened. Regardless of whether they were there or not, they want to know what's going on. But you give them a couple of weeks to think about it, and sometimes they get selective amnesia.
Captain Thomas, thank you so very much. If you'll wait just a moment up there, I think we have a question or two. We do appreciate the fact that you pull these together as estimates, and certainly we identify them as estimates when we use them. And in our research, we will be having some hard data where people have actually, who are in the accounting profession, can help us out. But we do really appreciate what you've done, and I think Elliot has a question.
I do have a question. First of all, just to share a little bit, I don't think anybody in this room knows this about me, but years ago, when I lived in Knoxville, I went through the police academy and became a commissioned officer. And what we were taught back then is that these cases for officers are the most dangerous calls you get. I know in Bristol we had a horrific tragedy with Mark Vance being killed at one of these calls. Is that still the sentiment of your team and the sheriff's team about the danger of these domestic violence calls? And if so, is it because of the drugs and the alcohol that may be involved, or has the training gotten you to a different point with it?
Well, I think there are a lot of dynamics, like Sheriff Mathis said, that cause these calls to be dangerous. And one of the big things, one of the things that I think everybody that's been a law enforcement officer and has answered a domestic violence call will tell you is you get there, whether it's the man or the woman, if somebody's going to jail, when you lay hands on that person to put them in jail, a lot of times you end up fighting them and the spouse who was 15 seconds ago was saying, I want him to go to jail. You're inside their house, which is they know it, you don't. You don't know where they've got weapons secreted or hidden.
Or in East Tennessee, people have guns and weapons.
Exactly right. So,
They do
fortunately, I think due to better training, and one of the things we do when we do our domestic violence training at the police department is we don't just talk about how to make arrests and how to document what you did and how to get a good prosecution. We also talk about how to handle these calls in a safe manner. And I think that has helped to drop the number of law enforcement officers that are killed each year in answering these calls. So it's not necessarily that there's it's not the call now that we're seeing the most officers killed on, but they still are very, very dangerous. Emotions are high. There's been an assault committed in most of these cases, and that's going to oftentimes spill over to the officer when they go to make an arrest. So.
Did you have something? Phyllis?
Thank you both for your testimonies, and Sheriff Mathis and Captain Thomas, both of you may want to answer this. We were just in Jackson on the 15th, and we had a similar rundown of one crime where a husband went to the workplace and not only killed his wife, but several bystanders. So my question to you is, what do you see as a trend as domestic violence leaving the home and going to the work site? Because a woman can leave the home and find shelter, but she still goes to work. So if he can't find where she's staying, he can go to her job site. So are you seeing a trend in that? And what are you doing to train and working with the chambers and other stakeholders and influencers in the city to identify this as potential problems that you work with every day, but they may not?
I think we get a lot of interest from places within the city wanting to talk about workplace safety. I know a lot of places, especially the larger employers, have already started their own workplace safety programs, and they talk about active shooters or situations like this spilling over. But it's funny you ask that question, because the same apartment complex where this murder happened back in May, in 2008, we had a domestic violence situation where a young man went in, killed 4 people over there in the same location, and then fled to Carter County. And Sheriff Mathis and his guys cornered him, and he took his own life. So we're not, even though we're small communities, we're not immune to that kind of thing happening here. So it's something that people need to be aware of, and there's not a lot as individuals that we can do to prevent it. That takes a joint effort between law enforcement and the employers, and making sure the workplace is safe. But having a plan that if you're working somewhere and they don't have a work safety plan, knowing if I hear gunshots, this is what I'm going to do. Because if you think about it beforehand, you're more than likely going to not panic and do something that may help save you. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead.
I'll just add that I think it's some of those things, it's often a reaction for the employer after the fact. That's one of those things, well, we've got other priorities, things we need to do. That's until they have something happen. Mayor Giuliani formerly was the idea to put a police officer in every corner of New York City to make it safer. But even in the end, he said that it takes good people that are not the law enforcement to help law enforcement to step up for us to have a safe community, no matter if we do have an officer in every corner. So we can't do it all. We need good people to step up and help us when those things arise.
You're right. We had a good example of that when we were in Chattanooga, and we heard from Blue Cross Blue Shield. They didn't have a plan in place until they had an incident with one of their employees. And we know what a large employer they are. And after that happened to them, they did remedy that, and they have put in a workplace plan now for their employees. Okay, can we, yes,
A comment along the same lines, though, I think a lot of the domestic violence is going to occur in the home because it's easier for the abuser to hide it. If you're taking it into the workplace, you know, a lot of these people present when they're out in public as very nice people. They're very manipulative. They can gauge their appearance to other people, and so they will avoid the workplace because if you go in there, you've got third-party witnesses who you're less likely to be able to influence to recant or to not prosecute you. You may have video cameras that might actually capture it. So speaking with regards to just Sullivan County, I think we see more of the in-home versus the
Sure.
outside the home.
Sure.
And that's just probably a calculated move on the
Right.
part of the defendant.
yeah, right, and we see that the people who do go in the workplace a lot of times end up with suicide, killing themselves. They're ready.